Welcome to the Academy of Esports podcast. I'm your host, James O'Hagan. I have the pleasure to welcome back to the podcast, who is now the Collegiate Coach of the Year for the National Association for Esports Coaches and Directors, Dr. Chris Haskell from Boise State. Dr. Haskell, thank you so much for being back on the podcast.
Of course, you have made a big update to your background. Your background game is strong.
That is our 5 jerseys from our of our esports teams here in Racine, and we're adding our 6th. We're adding our 6th this fall. We're going to add our alternative school. They're going to be coached, and not just as I'm going to be the esports czar, but I'm going to be one of the coaches of that group as well too. So I get to now.
My goodness!
I get to put on my coaching hat once again and step back into the ring and compete. Yes,
I love it. This is going to be awesome.
It should be. I hope so. Granted, of course, we've been shut down since St. Patrick's Day, and we've been, a school district of 18,000 students. You can imagine that's, trying to figure out, between county and city, how we're going to re-enter. And state of Wisconsin says one thing. Boise State, I don't think you guys really stopped. We were chatting a little bit before.
Yeah.
How has COVID impacted Boise State coming out of in the last couple of months?
Well, I mean, everybody echoes the idea. I think Mark Deppy said, esports are COVID proof, and he's right to an extent. We can continue operations. It's not quite the same experience or feeling for the kids if they're not in the same place, but we can replicate a lot of the procedures, and certainly matches can happen wherever the students are. But during what we got the announcement, I think the same amount of time. It was like, all right, no more students on campus, and faculty, except for if you have a critical lab that you're running, you need to move operations off. Everybody got essentially the same one. We had commitments to a couple of big sponsors, including those tied to scholarships, that required us to continue broadcasting even though we'd been sent home. So we had to really dig into REMI model, which is REMI, essentially. Anybody can look it up. It's essentially using the cloud as your broadcast input mixer. So my observers had to move to their apartments or back home with their families and still do their jobs while they were there. So we had to work out all of and I won't bore everybody with the custom RMTPs and RMTP polls and bringing those into an aggregator and aligning the time, putting our producers, all the data that they're changing into a new system so that it would feed directly into the broadcast graphics system. We had to figure out basically how to do what Blizzard does, what Riot does, what Skillshot Studio had to do during this break. We had to match. A lot of learning.
It is a lot of learning, but let me ask you this again, because you're not a professional. I mean, you're professional in style, but you're not a professional organization. You're a collegiate organization.
Yeah.
I know in our community, I had issues just with connectivity to the home, where we figure about 30% of our kids don't have internet access into the home. Did you have to assist, I guess, any of your current students who are working in that regard to help get them access? I mean, I know Idaho is, I won't call it Big Sky Country, that's next door, but it's still a mountainous rural area. And I'm sure there are a lot of students who maybe return to those rural, especially when they get to the northern panhandle parts of Idaho. Yes. Were there issues of connectivity for any of those kids? And if were there any ways that you worked around those issues that they may have had?
There were naturally issues once they got back home, and mom and dad, for example, had not been going with the platinum plan. They had just been doing because with the kids gone, I mean, they didn't need it. Yeah. We had some folks that they didn't have the bandwidth and the latency strong enough that they could contribute in the way that they had before. So what we had to do is change some of their roles. In a few cases, we said, just don't worry about it. You've got a lot going on at home. We'll pick it back up in the fall when we're all back together, and bring in some new people for that. But yeah, some people had to change roles entirely. There are things that you can't change, and the sooner you realize those in the process, the less time you waste trying to change things that you can't change. Mm-hmm. And the more creative that you get. It's the I think you and I even talked about the haiku method. Reduce the degrees of freedom and creativity increases.
Well, and Was that because I know you, again, one of the big themes of last time too was adding chairs. You know, band director,
Yeah.
I have a band background where Purdue University, 400 kids on campus, and it was like no school of music, but that's the thing that kept me on campus and kept me engaged in school for many years. Was that having all those chairs at that point a strength? Again, let's say we did have that kid, for example, who might not have had that connectivity at home. Was it able to, I guess, move somebody from third chair or second chair up to first chair, or rearrange the chairs, if you will? Hey, percussion. Yeah, we have too many snare players.
Yep.
Now we need a bass drum player and we need a timpani player.
Exactly. Well, we had some students for whom COVID affected them more dramatically than others. Some just kind of went home and just kept doing what they were doing. Others went home to situations where they, as a family, had to care for different folks, or they had to get a job to contribute. And so having more chairs definitely assisted us in releasing kids from like painful obligation to, look, you know what your schedule is. When you can jump in. You're not going to lose your seat, but also don't feel like you've got to cancel your new work shift so that you can play on a Friday night because we'll find a sub for you. Having more people really helped with that.
Well, and it also helps too. I mean, the philosophy around your program has never been about, hey, we can win matches, and you still have, I believe, the record for the most match wins of any esports program in the United States. But your focus hasn't been national championships. Your focus has been on graduation, getting kids involved in something that connects them to the schools. I think that your philosophy probably jived really well, again, with that, where we will find the sub for you, or we're able to grow our talent. Whereas if it is just 6 kids who are our Overwatch team and 5 kids who are our League of Legends team, now you're kind of pigeonholing yourself into problems, I guess.
Well, yeah. If we had been limited, I'm really impressed with what a lot of other folks did with smaller rosters. I think of Michael Jones at Drury, or I mentioned Mark and Kathy at UCI, who have these limited numbers of spots. Colin Graham at Davenport. I think of Adam Antor at Aquinas University. They all have. I mean, they had like 6 roster spots, and in some cases, and I'll even mention Kevin Reap at Missouri. With those limited roster spots, they still were able to, in most cases, fulfill their match requirements with the players that they had simply by moving them to other places. But in a couple of situations, they had to be released, and so I would say that for us, that was a little bit easier. For those directors, it was a little bit harder, but they also had big club groups, and they found students to fill those, and all of the organizations, NACE and TESPA, and everywhere we were playing that was able to continue or even delay slightly their schedule come back. They all came back with rules that helped us to manage the fact that students were going to be gone. So, but it was really impressive to see that these students whose competitive experience in the spring was abruptly, in some cases, ended or changed, they still got their degree. They still participated in their virtual graduation, which that was a whole thing that no one expected.
Well,
students still finished, yeah.
And we talked, believe it or not, Dr. Haskell, it has been July 26th was the last time we talked about on the podcast. So it's been almost a year. You did talk about the 9 students that you were graduating out of your program. What does the future look like right now, even for graduation rates at Boise State? Because again, I keep raising that, you raised a good point about graduation rates, and I have been approached by other esports coaches who want to recruit. And one of the first questions that I ask is, well, I know you may have a new program or it's very young, but where are your students right now as far as graduation? Are they on pace, or has this been a churn mill, or kids coming and going? Is it a different roster every year? Where are you at right now with your program at Boise State? Like I said, I think we were looking at 9 for this spring. So what does the future look like for the next coming year?
Well,
I mean, it's hard to say, but
Yeah, we've been a program for 3 years. We graduated the 4 that we anticipated that we would graduate in the spring, and they were a broadcaster, a production student slash varsity player, and then 2 full-time varsity players. And that's a credit to the university for making the way they had to complete fit, right? In some cases, classes that had been letter grade were converted to pass fail, just to make sure that people had the requirements, and that we were, I guess, flexible, with the changing conditions. But how it affects our students in the future, there are a handful that are genuinely, and I think appropriately, reconsidering their career choice. I'm a big proponent that the most valuable thing you can do by pursuing a career path, is discover that you knew enough and that you selected the right thing. But equally to that, the discovery of, oh, this is not for me, right? I'm actually interested in this area over there. So I'm never opposed, and I've had a few students do this who say they were interested in nursing, and now they just don't know if that's the life that they'll be the best at, because of things they've gotten. That's not to knock them for their lack of commitment. They've just learned enough about themselves to know that they may really struggle in that profession. And so some of their graduations are simply being delayed by the nature of changing what they want to study.
But I think that is a natural thing. I mean, my father is a perfect example. He started at the University of Notre Dame back in the 1964 when they didn't allow freshmen to participate on the varsity team, but he played freshman football. So he was like basically the practice squad.
Yeah.
And when it came time for him to go to the varsity team his sophomore year, he found out very quickly that he was going to have to change his major, that he wouldn't actually be able to be an aerospace engineer, that he was going to have to, I think, switch to business, or there was some other, like an arts and letters type of program. And he decided that, he was going to give up football and did that with and switched and stayed with his engineering. Me, on the other hand, I was a chemistry major for the first 2 years at Purdue University and found that no, I did not want to clean beakers for the first several years of my life. Where I had this great fascination with chemistry my junior and senior year of high school, it had gone away in college, and I switched to elementary education. Yeah, those are natural switches. The ones I'm talking about, the one I'm concerned about, and this is the example I use, is the Bob Huggins example, I guess. Bob Huggins is a basketball coach. Well, he's a basketball coach, was at Cincinnati, is at West Virginia, and I think his graduation rates is, if it's not single digits, it's in the teens. So those are the people who, nationally competitive every year, but those are the programs that I'm really watching out for, where maybe the mindset is more of, we're going to have the best team in the nation. We're really trying to pull kids who aren't necessarily who are going to be great prestige for the university, but may not be on a track to graduate. And I'm not saying that's taking a kid to college isn't always, and then not graduating isn't always a bad thing either. But it's dangerous when it's the mindset of, we're going to be competitive every year at all costs. And if that cost is, I'm going to use a kid for a year or two, and if they don't graduate,
Right. Well, you have to find the people that you think are going to be successful in your program. One of the things that we look for in a recruit is their past academic record, because that indicates a lot. It's not an accident that schools identify high academic record students as scholarship students, right? They recognize that what they've shown in the past, not always an indicator for future success, but that those students tend to thrive in that system. And I think that there's a lot of interest in recruiting students who are very good at a game for obvious reasons. They want to be competitive. They want to bring attention and excitement around their team. But those students need to be even propped up a little bit more academically, because that's a danger for them. If their grades have not been good, if they've been, in that 2 to 2.5 grade point average, certainly some of the activity can be explained as anomalous, or had mono the beginning of this year and it tanked a lot of things. But teams have to be willing to support those students with more resources, maybe more time and attention than those other students, despite their level of playing. And sometimes there's a correlation between their low grades and their high game performance in just how they spent their time in the last couple of years, for example. That shouldn't disqualify somebody, but and this is something I don't tell everybody, but I guess we are now. I also believe that there are students who really can grow into academic success.
Absolutely.
I have a terminal degree, but my high school GPA, I'm not making this up, 1.71.
Wow.
My undergraduate degree, 2.49. I couldn't get that 2.5. I don't know why. It took a little bit. For my master's degree, it was 3.89, and for my PhD, it was 4.0. Right. So that's the right trajectory.
And we do have kids who do that, who at the high school level, when they finally get involved in esports, and this is maybe a great thing for people who, a lot of districts right now are going to start struggling for money. Just like colleges are going to start struggling for money, especially at the state level, because a lot of it is tax revenue based. And we did have, a significant 2.5 month blip on those budgetary radars, where some states are going to ask school districts and ask colleges and universities to make cuts. I still am of the mindset, the way that I sell esports a lot of times to my schools is, if I can keep, if I have 230 kids on my program and let's say a quarter of them, which let's just use our average, a quarter of them are not going to graduate on time. Every 4 years, if I could graduate an additional 5 to 10 kids a year, what does that mean for you monetarily? What does that mean, for the kid who maybe was, on a track needing a 5th year, or even maybe worse, even a 6th year, but I can work with them through credit recovery and get them up to speed. And then they start making the connections in the classroom and realizing that school can be part of everything else that I'm doing. I agree with you that kids can grow into it. And I think that esports, even now, as we're talking about, I think you and Mark talked about how esports is a perfect COVID, I guess,
COVID proof. Yeah.
COVID proof. But in a lot of ways, it's not. I see how how esports cannot be COVID proof. I mean, Deadspin not too long ago ran a post in April, I think, about the collegiate sports programs that were being cut. These ones that had been kind of fringe for years, because really it's only basketball and football that make money for the universities. And people are like, well, esports is COVID proof, it's cut proof, and I keep looking at it going, it's not necessarily that way, because not everyone who's in your position or in my position sees esports in the same light. We still have to tell the story. We still have to, again, as you're talking about, maybe there are those kids who, came to the university and were not academically prepared, but esports has helped make them grow into being those students. Or talk about those kids who maybe weren't going to graduate on time, but found their connection to their school. We have to still talk about those things. What are you at Boise State doing, I guess, to tell the story? Because again, you have one of the biggest programs in the United States. You even, last time we talked, you were expanding to provide a non-competitive or I don't know if it was non-competitive, but like a community space. How are you telling the story at Boise State now?
Wow, that's a big question.
Sorry, I can make it longer. I can make it a bigger question.
No. Mark's a great example. I mean, I talk about Mark all the time. He's a superstar, and AJ Dimmick too. Those two poor guys made the mistake of giving me their phone number, and I just harassed them nonstop. Still, I credit them with so much, but really making sure that everybody understands what you stand for. For Mark, it's their pillars. For AJ, it's their core values, and lots of folks have these. And making sure that you're still providing those. For us, two of them are spotlight and service, right? We spotlight our players, but different organizations on campus. I boil it down that we're kind of like pirate radio here, or pirate television. We can broadcast whatever people need. And during the COVID break, they needed some help. And so we pitched in and brought our students virtually together to put on productions for other departments that were not esports related. Sometimes they were just a conference or an award ceremony that they wanted to do, but they lost their ability to do it, and they needed to do more than Zoom could do. And we were able to, pitch in and help them and spread it to lots of locations and help them with those pieces. So providing value, I think that was where you get to that. Are you doing just your work and trying to get other people to find it valuable, or are you using what you do to serve others? And that's how we continue to create value on our campus. Is yes, I mean, we're going to compete, we're going to prepare, we're going to play our games, but we're using the broadcast arm of what we do to help other people out. And we do it willingly. And sometimes we even ask, is there anything we can help with? Because we've got some experience in this area now, as this pirate television studio that allows us to serve other departments on campus. We did in the beginning of July, we're going to host an esports event between the football and the basketball teams. And
cool.
They just need to be able to create energy around their program, give their fans something to chew on that isn't just a Twitter video, right? They need an opportunity to bring those kids together. Right now we can do it with video games, and they're just thrilled that we can help, and that's something that we're happy to help with. So providing value to make sure that that people are aware of what you're doing sometimes isn't about trumpeting what you're doing, but helping other people do what they're doing.
Well, and I think too, what you're talking about, the basketball and the football, I mean, again, those are the money-making institutions on most college campuses. And I think, and again, this goes back to, again, I'll talk about my father and his love of Notre Dame football. And he gets so upset. And when he gets upset, I have to say to my dad, you have to remember these are 18, 19, and 20-year-olds that you're getting upset about. And I think even on the big stage, the blue turf on Thursday nights, or it's NBC on Saturday afternoons, it's very easy for people to forget that these are 18, 19, 20-year-old, 21-year-old kids. It's hard to say kids because, yes, they can get drafted, they can go to war, but they're still students, they're still kids. By and large, most of them are not going pro. And it's really important. I think what you're talking about is that humanization, using your platform to help provide a level of insight and humanization to remind people that in the Boise State community, that these are our students still. You may see them on a big stage at some point, but I think using that platform of video games and showing that these are really just a bunch of kids who are just hoping to earn a college degree, working to earn that college degree. I think that's a tremendous use of your platform, and something that I hope other colleges may do as well.
Yeah, and I think that it's a relatively easy one. You're basically opening your playground to other people, and they're already playing these games, especially in the sports. I mean, we had a football versus esports matchup for charity, raised thousands of dollars, I think $10,000 for a couple of different scholarships and charities on and around campus. And the football players kicked our trash in a couple of the games that we did not anticipate. They were so good. Call of Duty, right? We don't play Call of Duty competitively, but I was kind of hedging my bets here going, I think we got them at this. We know shooters, right? No. They wrecked us. It was
really,
I was like, if we spin this up, I know where I'm going for talent. They were really, really good. We beat them at some other games, but in the end, their Call of Duty skills were really strong. The point is, kids are playing these games. Athletes are playing these games. This is cultural. This is not a niche group. We're just pulling together some students who don't get attention for a lot of other things. And we bring them together and let them come together around this, which is the thing that they choose to love. But that doesn't mean that other folks aren't playing these games at a very high level.
I guess I'm a little surprised, though. I guess I'm not. Again, it does come back to that competitive spirit, and people who are willing to give of themselves on a Saturday and through spring football and summer weightlifting and to prepare for 12, hopefully 13 games in a football season, 12, 13 Saturday afternoons for a few hours, Think about that. I guess that makes a whole lot of sense, that those competitive outlets would need to be into other spaces as well too. And it just so happens that, as you said, Call of Duty is apparently the one where, if you want to I would make it a spring sport. Say, hey, you know what? We're going to make Call of Duty our spring thing, and then have the football players like, okay, you can do both. You can do both. And I think
that's a good idea.
Yeah. So shifting gears a little bit again, just to reiterate, Collegiate Coach of the Year for the National Association of Esports Coaches and Directors. But I know that you were very humbled by that recognition, and I could tell in your Twitter post.
They got it so wrong, right?
Well, let's talk about what some of these other people are doing, because again, you earlier you rattled off some names of people who I know who are out there, who are active, who are engaged in the community. Let's step back and let's say you weren't the one who got that award. I think deservedly so, but we digress. Who would you say then is maybe somebody who people should be looking to and looking at and going, you know what, that's a person who I think could have easily gotten this award?
Well, keep in mind too, there's this spectrum between coach and director that almost everybody in the industry fills. Mm-hmm. When you are coaching with your 6th spinoff school this coming fall, you're going to play a role kind of somewhere in between there. So my title here is head coach, but I really am the director. Dana Husted at Grand Valley is a great example of somebody who's called a director, but she really does a lot of the coaching, maybe not as much X's and O's, but we all need to understand that the players in almost every case, even with some really, really great, Callum Fletcher at Illinois Wesleyan, a great example of a guy who's a head coach, who's really in the X's and O's, but even he is still a coach of players playing together more than he is a coach of each individual role. Mm-hmm. And he does amazing. He's built a program there that is really surprising. Not that religious private schools don't have great programs. Gonzaga is a great example in Spokane, mm-hmm. Of somebody who competes every year, and they're not considered a state school power like an Ohio State or a Florida.
It's a very small campus, and I actually have a cousin who was a professor at Gonzaga. Now he's at Spokane Falls Community College because he prefers the student body there than he did at Gonzaga. Funny enough, and I've tried to get him to become an esports coach and director. Actually, I've tried to convince him, but anyway, sorry.
I love it.
But you're right.
Anyway, but so it's the spectrum that we all kind of participate on. But I think NACAD did a great job. Director of the year would have been my director of the year, which is Sean Burney at St. Clair Canadian College. He's fantastic. They didn't have a program. They found him. They hired him. Huge community, amazing broadcast. They're really competitive. They were the national champions in a couple of different games that we don't play, including V sports, like virtual reality sports.
Oh, okay.
They were. I can't remember the name of the game. He'll shoot me for this, but he a great example. But you mentioned folks that I am constantly asking questions to, who mm-hmm. Propped me up. I mentioned AJ and Mark and Kathy Chong. She gets credit down there at UCI too for everything that she does.
Yes.
But truly, some of my absolute favorite coaches. I mentioned Callum Fletcher. I'm a big fan of some of these folks who really get in and dig around. Joe at Harrisburg, who's their Overwatch coach, is really an X's and O's kind of guy, and does amazing work preparing his humans for life after this thing, mm-hmm. right? Does really, really great work. Let me think. It depends on what direction we're talking about. If it's preparing good humans, worrying about their lives and coaching them into just being successful, Dana Husted, a great example at GVU. Ashley Jones at Park does really, really cool stuff with her kids. Recently, I had the opportunity to go through a bunch of the NACAD coaches training, and I'm just reminded at just how much good work is happening out there. I mean, Josh Knutsen's no longer the director and head coach at Jamestown, but he taught me just a ton about how he organizes things. Nathan Ragsdale at Midland, another great example of somebody who's really into the pedagogy of coaching esports. And that's the thing that has been kind of missing for a lot of us, is that, we don't really have kind of a pedagogical approach to how it all works. We're learning from one another. And so, yeah, you mentioned, I mean, it really is a wonderful award, and it will bring a lot of really positive vibes for these kids on my campus, and which I think is fabulous. But I feel sheepish about it, knowing that there's so many talented people out there doing what they do. I mean, Kevin Reap is another one. I mean, I've got life goals wrapped around Kevin Reap anyway, just because he's a cool dude. But the guy started it got dropped in his lap like a year ago, a little more than a year ago, that, hey, you're going to do this. And he built a NACE champion Rocket League team, a TESPA finalist Overwatch team, and a multiple tournament winning League of Legends team out of nothing. I mean, there's nobody. And he had to recruit and bring those people in, teach them how to college, because many of them hadn't already, find the right strategic coaches to help them. I mean, that guy.
And what I'm hearing is, again, it goes back to, again, adding chairs. It's not just adding chairs to your program, but it's also adding chairs to your, I guess, the community in which you work. That you're, if you had just been doing this by yourself and said, okay, I'm going to just set this all up by myself, to heck with everybody else, or maybe you have a couple of people, but again, there is a network, and I want to preface this by saying, if you're new to esports, if you're new to this game, it's good to learn and watch and learn, ask some questions here and there. The worst thing you could possibly do is just go to somebody and say, hey, tell me everything you know about esports. But because these, what we've been doing for several years is a lot of work. And that's a loaded question, but approaching these people with specifics, like, hey, I see you do this really well. Like, for example, I see Chris Haskell has a phenomenal broadcasting program. I'm not going to necessarily say, hey, teach me everything you know about broadcasting, but like, how do you do this one? Like, I see you do this one thing that I like really well. How can you explain to me how you do that? Or do you have somebody who can tell me how you do that? Or I think it's having these networks is great, but it's also coming with, I guess, respect and realizing that there's people who have put so much time and effort into everything that they're doing that, yes, we are willing to share, but at the same time, there needs to be, again, a sense of respect when asking somebody, or thankfulness too, because I seem to think that a lot of people seem to think they can just get this off of YouTube and just do it that way too,
Yeah. It's that openness in any career that really helps that community come together. I don't know enough about college basketball, football, volleyball coaches to understand how that world works, but my sense is that it's similar, right? That they help each other. They're not handing over their playbook at the beginning of the year,
right? Because
they do have to be, for that world to work, just like esports. There has to be competitive storytelling, right? We have to try to defeat them. We have to get overturned by a Colorado State once in a while when we were an undefeated favorite to go into the championship game for the Mountain West. Colorado State beat us in League of Legends in the 5th game. And we made some mistakes that opened the door for them, but they executed on it. Now, when that game's over, I mean, that one stung. The first time that squad had not been back to Las Vegas for the live finals, that one hurt. That doesn't change the way we feel about those people, right? We have a lot of respect for those people and what they accomplished, we want that for ourselves, but we don't take away anything from what they did. That culture, I think, exists through the college community, and I anticipate that it'll be the same in the high school community, where those professional groups start to come together and share what they know. But I mean, we can credit folks like like the Godfather himself, Kurt Melcher at RMU, for again, for Kathy and for Mark and everybody at UCI who just opened the book. Here's what we do. Here's what it costs. Here was our budget. Here was our, take it, do with what you want. They set the trend for this openness of wanting to share what we do. So, I mean, somebody calls me and says, hey, how did you do, you mentioned broadcasting, and say, how did you do this one thing? I mean, I'll fire up the camera, stand in the control room and like point out everything. And we use this thing over here and we use this. Again, we're not competing for who is the best program ever, right? That's an argument for people who are way too obsessed with this to have. For us, we're in competition on every one of our campuses for the attention of stakeholders for our students, right? And
we're trying to get kids to graduate. I mean,
yeah.
Ultimately with all this, and that's the thing I think a lot of people forget when they see, I guess, the esports money grab, because it's real. The dollars are coming into it more and more and more, especially with COVID. The dollars really flowed in heavily. And I've even had this conversation with some developers where it's like, you have to understand the collegiate space and the high school space, while both school institutionally based, have very different goals. What we're trying to do at the high school level is very different than the collegiate level. It isn't about money. It isn't about necessarily prize pools or anything like that. What we're trying to do ultimately is, what are the goals for our institution? Hopefully, if we're running it right, is the goals of our institution. What you're doing at Boise State is awesome, but it may not be what my program needs to do in Racine to be awesome. Again, we're going to compare ourselves to how many students are we graduating and what is our success rate with that. And if we win a national championship or a state championship or something else, God bless us. But it is ultimately what you're trying to do, what I'm trying to do, and is it best for our students and what we need to do to be successful, right?
Exactly. Really, you don't get credit for building the best wall. You get credit for using the wall to teach all the skills that they are going to need to build their houses, right? I mean, it's a vehicle for personal growth, for understanding, for teamwork, for all of those things, and that's why we bring them together. You can do that and perform at a very high level. That's always the goal, but that's not the ultimate goal.
Right. And we see it all the time with people who are just, like I say, I use the term rushing to implementation. They see what Boise State is doing and they say, well, we want that. And it's not just a matter of dollars and putting it together. Because again, if they just looked at the physical structure of your program and tried to copy paste it, put it in wherever they are, they're missing out on the nuances of that it is made by people, that it is community, that it is those things that you can't just take from one place and put in another. That's I think a thing that a lot of people really do miss. And that leads to, if you think you're just going to take a space and put it in and you're going to have kids show up, you're going to lead to, again, a homogeneous culture, not a heterogeneous culture. You really have to recruit and build and make people want to give something that they want to be a part of, not just say, oh, these computers are really cool, don't you want to play here? Some of these kids might have better computers in their dorm room. They don't need to come out and play where you're at. So,
well, a great example of that is if you try to copy what someone is doing and put it in your space, that you may not be considering what your community actually is interested in. A great example is that, UCI has a great example of quite a bit of the space as a for-profit space, right? So they rent, not for-profit, but it's a cost center, right? They bring
students come in, they pay a small fee to use the space, right?
we use that as part of our model coming in. We discovered a year and a half into it that just was not the interest for our student body, and that we needed to find other ways to offset what we had expected to bring in an income. And there were a lot of reasons why it didn't work for us. One of them was location of the space, the ability to advertise the space, and in Southern California, they have a culture of the PC Bong there where they go in to play, and it's where they go in to socialize. It's an alcohol-free video game bar, essentially, right? They go in to be there with their friends. We don't have that culture in Idaho. We discovered that along the way. So building and designing based on who you are and what you want to accomplish is way more important.
Well, we have just a few more minutes, Dr. Haskell, unfortunately today. I feel like with COVID, now that everybody is home and we have our known hours and everybody can look at everybody's schedule, it's like they want to put meetings on top of meetings on top of meetings, like back to back. Yeah, I think more so than when we were all face to face. But as you're looking to set up and launch in the fall, what is it looking like for your program? What's the sense that you have right now, the collegiate space, as we're getting ready to hopefully, in some regards, come back on campuses? I know my college, Purdue University, is like, yep, we're all going to be back on campus, minus the international students. Others are taking a much more, I guess, cautious approach, if you will. Where do you see, I guess, the fall shaping up right now for the collegiate space? Or can you even see, or is it still this ambiguous thing?
For me, I mean, it's going to be lots of business as usual with some unique characteristics thrown in. Our campus is going to be masks all year. If you're a faculty or student or a staff, you'll wear a mask on campus. That will change a few things just in the way we do things, but it won't derail what we're doing. We just have to change our delivery method. We should always be prepared to do that. We're going to have to, and it's ordered and we'll install it, I think, in the next week. We'll have to put plexi between machines. We'll have to basically put our salad bar sneeze guard in between people and change our cleaning protocol. We'll have to spread people out. We'll just have to be aware of those types of things. It may mean we do less public competitions and performances and just do more broadcasting. We're already pretty well, set up to do that. The core of what we do won't dramatically change. It will likely be really good for us to develop some new ways of doing things, because in the end, the goal hasn't changed. It's to provide a great experience for these students that fits somewhere wonderful in the real world. And so we got to figure out, okay, well, what can we borrow from Blizzard? What can we borrow from Riot or Skillshot? What can we borrow from these places that do what we do in a way that helps us continue to do what we do? Little things like, okay, we're going to have some backdrops printed for when our broadcasters are broadcasting from home. Little things like that. We're just going to have printed. Well, we're going to have to, invest in some lights. We're going to have to, cut the corner on some of these technologies to figure out great ways to do this. And in the end, I think it'll make us just smarter. We should never expect that things are going to go back to the way they were. So as I tell myself every day when I look in the mirror.
Well, and hopefully we're finding things that, as we're taking these critical looks too, again, we've grown up in this space and we've kind of accepted some things, and now we don't even have to accept everything. We can really now use this opportunity as the opportunity to iterate and hopefully make things, as you're saying, take a moment to make things hopefully better in some way, or I guess better connected for some people in this space. Agreed.
Keep up the good work, man. This podcast rocks.
Trying to. It is, and for those who think you have to have a high production studio, Dr. Haskell is if you're watching this on YouTube or on Twitch, he's at his studios at Boise State. I'm about 6 feet away from a litter box in my basement, so it's very different worlds. But again, Dr. Haskell, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be a part of the Academy of Esports podcast. We will get you back for a third time, hopefully we did it in 11 months this time. Let's do it, let's say 6 months from now, and we'll see how the fall shook out and really give some people something to hopefully think about as well too, as some of the changes and things you've seen.
I love talking to you, and I love all the people you get to talk to. It's really cool.
Well, Dr. Haskell, thank you so much for being on the Academy of
You bet.
Esports podcast today.